Hey GearFacts friends! Today I'm giving you a tutorial of Zoom's new B1x-FOUR multi-effect system for bass. Okay, so this is how you connect. It's all quite simple and self-explanatory. The software installs, detects the hardware, and within a few moments you're ready to go. This will appear on the pedal, and this will appear on your screen. B1x-FOUR, ready to communicate. It starts you off with a list of all the available effects, which you can go ahead and freely swap between the pedal and the computer. On the next screen you can have a look at the patches that are already set up in the pedal. And you can even go ahead and edit those patches. Any changes that you make will happen live in the pedal, so you can have your guitar with you and audition them as you go. And when you finally finish doing that, you just press the eject button, like so, and we're ready to play. It's an entirely new system, and I may not be able to cover everything about the system in the short amount of time that we have, but I've tried to frame this picture in such a way that we can see what's going on with the pedal, clearly see the display, and see what's happening on the actual bass guitar too. So obviously when it starts up, we can go through our patches by pressing the plus minus pedal. That's obvious. You can also go through the first digit using the push buttons at the front. So rather than clicking 10 times to go from 12 to 22, I can just use that as a shortcut. Let's say we want to edit though. You press this button. It cycles through memory, stomp, and edit. The first page is stomp, and that shows us which 5 stomp boxes or virtual stomp boxes we're using, and you can switch them on and off just doing that. And this is a good way to quickly experiment how adding sounds or taking away sounds will change your overall patch. So another good shortcut feature there. Press again and we're into edit. Same thing happens, except we get a magnified view of each of our virtual pedals this way. So the first one there is the bass octave fuzz, and we can see our individual controls. Each parameter corresponds with a dial. So it's that simple. And having shown you that only about 1 minute into this video, we've covered about 75% of what you need to know to create all the sounds that you need on this pedal. Let's go back to the main screen where we're switching between our already created patches. And of course when you're starting up, you'll probably flick through all the patches, isolate a few that you like. I always like the fuzz patches. And then zoom in for a bit of editing. So there's our overall patch. Only 4 effects on this one, so that gives us room to add one more. And we might even do that now by pressing edit again. If we go to our 5th pedal spot, you'll see it's got bypass there. That's because nothing has been assigned. You can choose an effect just by tapping on the select pedal. So we're not changing through patches here, we're changing through individual effects to go into that slot that was vacant. And this is great because it's a very quick way of auditioning effects. There's our Z-tron, several filter types, several EQ types. You can give it more boost if you want, and it goes on and on and on for something like 100 effects. What I think would be logical, since this effect is at the end of the chain, would be to add some delay. Tape echo. Yeah, maybe analog delay? Maybe reverse delay? Okay, so we're in that zoomed in view now where we're controlling individual parameters of the effect. Sometimes in this 4th slot here you'll see a fractional number like 1/3 or 1/2. When you see that, it just means you can turn this last dial here and go between several pages of parameters. This particular effect just has the 1 page of parameters though, so let's shorten that delay time. Hopefully you can see a bit more clearly there. Increase the feedback, increase the balance, turn the tail on. The more extreme effects are really fun on the Zoom B1x-FOUR. There are some crazy filters like we saw a moment ago. There are some excellent modulation effects, and of course the more spacey things like reverse delay. If you decide it's not really working out though, you don't have to exit out of this to keep experimenting with different stomp boxes. You can just keep on pressing and keep adding those effects. Let's try something else a bit crazy. like adding overdrive on top of overdrive. To get some really hefty sounds like that. Or you might want to do something a little more conservative, like just experiment with the various cabinet simulators. A couple of people have said online that cabinet simulation is a bit of an issue with this pedal. Apart from making a massive difference to your sound, you have to be aware that it will take up a slot out of your 5 slots too. So previous generations of Zoom pedals had the cabinet simulation integrated with the drive sound. Not so with this one, it's a separate thing on its own. So use your effects chain wisely, and while we're on this screen I'll show you that this is a great opportunity to isolate effects that might be problematic to your sound. Like this one for example. Take out the Zoom noise reduction and listen to this. A big increase in the amount of noise that comes through, so obviously that's indispensable. But we're kind of covering old ground there, we already talked about that. So let's go to settings. This is another way that you can experiment with your sound and see if you can get a little bit more out of the effect selection that you've got, or maybe again isolate ones that are giving you trouble. You'll see that the first parameter is chain. This is not related to the dial. This time we're pressing the button to choose one of our settings. So chain comes up, and the way you change the order in which the effects are processed is by pressing the first one and moving it to the next one. So let's listen to the difference. It's unlikely that you're going to get a good result by putting your cabinet simulation first in your chain, but be open-minded about it and try every combination, because sometimes the order of the configuration can really make a big difference. Let's go back into our edit mode and choose an effect that's a little bit more influential, I suppose, over the whole mix. So we'll take away the expression pedal function and replace it with something like a phaser, or even better, univibe. I think we'd all agree that's a pretty influential effect on a sound. And one I personally like. Let's go back to our settings, go back to our chain, and change the order of things. So by moving noise reduction to closer to the beginning of the chain, we've already cleaned up the sound. And if we move univibe to the end of the chain, the overall sound often becomes a little bit more sterile. And you can see what I mean there. Try our comparison again. Pretty dirty sort of a sound. And a little bit more synth-like with the vibe at the end. And this is the way it generally works. Noise reduction and drive sounds generally close to the beginning. Modulations and delays, ambient sounds, things like that closer to the end. It's not a solid rule though. Like I said a moment ago, experiment. Try everything everywhere. Let's see what else is in the settings menu. Patch settings enables us to change things like the name of the patch. This is very easy. Cursor left and right and just change what letter is in there. You don't have to save it or anything, you just back out by pressing settings again. And if we look at our patch title, it has changed, so it's that easy. However, if you do want to save the patch specifically to another area, it can be done by pressing the third parameter here. And this is a good function as well, because you'll end up with 2 copies of the same patch, which is great for comparing things or setting up a system where there are subtle changes as you move through your patches, like adding a delay after a stock standard sound that you'll use for most of your song. Back to settings again. Master setup. While we're talking about save, on this page you can take away the option to auto save, so that if you go out of your patch you will lose your changes. Generally it's better to leave that on, but I guess we've all got our own ways of working through these things. Beats per minute. You can synchronize all of your delays and modulations to the beats per minute. And of course there's a pretty comprehensive drum system and a looper on board that can also be synchronized to that value. Pre-select. I'll show you this. It's off at the moment, so we're going to turn it on. Our sound is still running. Back to play mode. See how our sound hasn't changed. What we have to do is, or what we get the option to do, is go through our patches, keep on playing, and then not actually proceed to the next patch until we hit both pedals together. That's a pretty handy system. Again, it very much comes down to everybody's individual way of working, and this is a lot easier to do with your foot than your hand. But yeah, it's a good option. Let's go back to these settings. What was that last one? Power and LCD. Quite simple. You can choose your type of battery to get the best efficiency out of them. Economy basically means it'll auto shut down if no sound comes through it after a certain number of minutes. Backlight off or on. Depends on your lighting conditions on stage, I suppose. And contrast. Just to finish off in the time that we've got left, we'll have a listen to some rhythms. When we're in rhythm mode, the pedals become play and stop buttons. So just a boring metronome type thing there, which is called guide, and we can run through and select something good. Jazz funk. And you can set its own speed and volume. I mentioned the modulation and delay effect synchronizing with the beats per minute. This acts kind of like a master beats per minute, because in the effect editing section you can set the tempo of the effect to be synchronized to whatever this value is. And that includes synchronizing it to a quarter note or a half note or a whole note or whatever. And finally there is our drum volume. Let's go over to the looper. Now I'm just about out of time, and I've done a completely separate looping tutorial on the B1x-FOUR, so I'll put a link up to that. But to summarize, I'll say that you can synchronize it to the drum beat so that it kind of auto stops and loops back to the beginning of your bar. And of course we've got our usual beats per minute and separate volume controls as well. So you can have drum beats or not have a drum beat with your loop. It's not compulsory to use the drums, but it's great to know that it can be set up to synchronize perfectly with them. And again, I'll refer you to that other video. So that's my introduction to editing on the Zoom B1x-FOUR. GearFacts friends, remember we are on Instagram. Here are the links to other videos that are related and might interest you. Please like, comment or subscribe, or even better still, share GearFacts with other people on your social media. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.